know if it comes from I don't know if it comes from just the fact that it's so well known, and that something that is so well known can sometimes lose its meaning and then find a completely new meaning in your life over time. But thank you, Lois. And that prayer is an incredible prayer. If Jesus prayed it, then I think there's something to it. Today we're going into our second part of our three-part series on our mission. And our mission, our vision at North Hill, is that we want to see dead lives raised to new life in Jesus Christ. And that is not, and we do not mean that to be condescending to anyone who is not Christian, anyone who has not found their life to be something that they wanted to dedicate to Jesus, but rather that I look at Scripture and I've experienced in my own life that I have lived, but I have not really lived at times when I have not given my life to Jesus. And so what we want to see is we want to see people whose lives they may be breathing, but they're not fully living, and we want to see those lives raised to the fullness and the newness of life in Jesus Christ. That's what we want to see. But when we talk about what we want to see, we have to have, okay, well then how do we help that happen? Right? Because Jesus is the one that is the power, and He's the one who does that in someone's life. But what is the part that we play in that as North Hill Adventist Fellowship? And that's what our mission comes down to. And so this last week we talked about relevancy. And relevancy can sound like that buzzword, well, we just need to be modern and we need to be up with the times and all that stuff. But rather, I think that relevancy according to Scripture is something that is slightly different, or not slightly, quite different. That in Isaiah 43, it says God is doing a new thing. He says, I'm going to be doing a new thing. And what he was talking about was Jesus. Jesus was going to come to this earth, and he was going to change it all. But the problem was the Israelites focused so much on the past that they forgot that maybe God would want to do something today. And so as Christians, especially here at North Hill, we want to be people who are focused on the fact that maybe God actually has stuff to do today, and he wasn't done yesterday, and he wasn't done 2 years ago, and he wasn't done 20. We don't want to be those people who forget that God has something to do today. And the second thing is we don't want to be people who just lament culture and we complain about it and we discount it, because I firmly believe that culture and the things that we do as human beings is us searching for God, and I don't want to discount anyone's journey towards that. And I also do not want to discount the fact that every bit of culture is an avenue for the gospel of Jesus Christ to be preached into new places and in new ways. And then the last thing is we want to be meaningful. We so often just say stuff that means something to us, but we forget to think about the other person before we think about ourselves. And so that's the last thing. We want to be relevant to people's lives in meaningful ways. And that means that we actually have to think about them. That's not non-Christians. That's the person next to you and the person that you're going to meet tomorrow and all that stuff. We have to think about them. I think about them before I think about me. Right? That's the goal. I don't do a great job of that most of the time, but that's what I would hope to see out of my life and out of our lives here at North Hill Adventist Fellowship. But today, we talked about relevance. We're talking today about disciple making, and next week we're going to talk about multiplying, which is the biblical word to be bearing fruit. But today we're talking about disciple making, and this is a word, disciple, is a word that you hear all the time as a Christian, and it has various specific meanings to us as people. It means something different to every single person. But I want to talk about it and what it means to be people who make disciples. Have you ever had a time where you were asked to help out somewhere, and then you got there, and you ended up feeling completely useless? I've had a lot of times where someone would be like, hey, we need some young men to come help move something, right? So you go, and you get there, and well, they needed help moving like a table, and there's 17 people there ready to move the table. And so what you end up doing is there's 3 people who are actually doing the work, and then you're kind of sitting there kind of awkwardly hanging onto the edge, just I'm stabilizing it. You're useless. You're just what am I doing here? But you're there. Or other times, my beautiful, amazing, incredible, lovely wife will ask me to help her cook. And the vast majority of the time, 98% of the time, there's something specific that she needs me to do. But then there's the 2% of the time where I'm pretty sure she's asked me to help in the kitchen, not because she needs my help, but because she wants to talk to me while she's cooking, right? And so she'll ask me to do something like make rice, which is the simplest thing, at least I think it is. I sometimes mess it up somehow. She'll ask me like make rice or something like that, and I'm sitting there, and I'm just standing there because she wants me to make sure that the rice is going well, right? But it's just like 10 minutes of waiting for the thing to boil down, like all the water to boil out of it, right? And I'm pretty convinced that I'm just there because she wants me to talk to her. But you can sit there and feel like, well, what am I doing here? Like, I'm just making rice. There's other times where I've been, and I don't know, you've probably experienced the same thing. I've been to my fair share of meetings where it felt like me being there was literally pointless, okay? I don't know about you. I know that some of you right now are going back to the meeting that you had this week or last week, and you're just like, yeah, I know the feeling, right? You just sit there in the meeting and you're like, okay, none of this pertains to me. I'm literally here as a placeholder. You just have those thoughts, and it's frustrating and it's annoying, and we have these moments where we're just like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing here, but I feel kind of useless, or I feel like my presence is just with no point. But I've been wondering something. Actually, let me say this one more thing about this. When we're part of something, but you feel like you're useless, it kind of kills your motivation. It kills your drive, right? You can walk into a meeting feeling like, okay, we're going to get stuff done, and I'm going to make sure that people know where we're going, all this stuff, and then like 5 minutes in, you're just like, oh my goodness, this is going nowhere, and it kills your drive, and it kills your passion and your motivation. You feel like you could be utilizing time somewhere else, or you check out mentally when you feel useless or when you feel like you don't have a purpose in being where you're at. And I've been thinking about a couple of things, wondering about a couple of things. First, I think that a lot of us who have been Christians for a long time, we don't really know what to do with our faith. We're here, and like, okay, I know Jesus, and I know that He died for my sins, but now what? And like, what am I supposed to do with this? And then on the other hand, the second thing is there's probably some of you in this room right now, and there's a lot of people outside the walls of this place right now who aren't Christian or who haven't given their life to Jesus. And if you're sitting here today, or if there's someone outside these walls, they're thinking, well, what does it even mean to be a Christian, right? And we have those two problems that a lot of us who are Christians don't know what to do with our Christianity. And a lot of people who aren't Christian are like, well, what's the point in becoming a Christian, right? And the problem is that if I don't even know what I'm supposed to do, how will anyone else? So I want to focus in on what Jesus says to His followers. We go to the book of Matthew chapter 28. Matthew chapter 28. Matthew chapter 28 is the last chapter of Matthew. And it's fitting that what we're about to read happens at the end of Matthew. Matthew was one of the disciples of Jesus, and he was writing to the Jewish nation. He was saying, hey, listen, this guy that showed up is the Messiah that you've been looking for. He's the deliverer you've been looking for. You've been searching for someone to give you freedom from everything that is keeping you in bondage, all this stuff. Guess what? This is the guy, right? But then also, what if the Messiah isn't just for you? What if this Messiah has a bigger message? And that's what Matthew is trying to get at. He's like, yes, He's coming to you as the Jewish people so you can realize your calling, that you're called to be a different people who bring a different message to the world. But that's the point. It's like it wasn't just for you, it was for the world. And so we come to this moment here in Matthew chapter 28 where Jesus has died, He has gone through just a horrific period of time, but He raises to life. And people don't know what to do with it. It even says earlier on in Matthew chapter 28, verse 16, it says, now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them, and when they saw Him, they worshiped Him, but some doubted. Right? And even in this moment, they're like, I don't know how to deal with the fact that this guy was dead, is now back alive. I don't know how to deal with this. But the next thing that Jesus says to them is the calling that we call the Great Commission. And here it is, verse 18. Jesus came to them and said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. I love what Jesus does here because he's calling them to something, but also saying, hey, listen, I'm going to be with you. But I want to focus on this idea. He says, go and make disciples, right? Go and make disciples. What is a disciple? And what does a disciple do? And what are they supposed to be? And then the second of all, how in the world do we make disciples, right? Like, how does that happen? How does that occur? And so the first step here that we look at is disciples. Like, what is a disciple? The biblical word that's used here is the word mathetes, right? Mathetes. It comes from the root word monthano, which itself, you're going to love this, comes from a stem, math, okay? So what Jesus, I guess, is saying is we're going to quadratic equation our way to becoming disciples of Jesus Christ, right? That's the way that goes. If that's the case, I'm done for. It's not happening. I don't know about you, but math was a necessary evil. That's all it was. Is there an amen out there? Okay. Just a side note here. My roommate failed the easiest level of math at Walla Walla, and he's now a teacher, so that's scary. The biblical word for disciple is mathetes. It comes from monthano, and the stem is math. But math, the word math, is not talking about math as we think about it today. What it means is it means the mental effort needed to think something through. The mental effort needed to think something through, right? So that stem is pretty much saying that this is something you have to think about, you have to process, it has to become internal, right? And then the word monthano, which comes from that stem, means I learn. And then the word mathetes literally means to learn, right? So if we're going to define what a disciple is, it's learner, right? Someone who learns, a learner, which is really incredible, right? Because what it does is it takes away a lot of our ability as Christians to judge, okay? Because if I'm a learner and you're a learner, and for some reason I have in my heart that you're not where you should be, and you why won't you get it together, and why aren't you farther along? It's like, well, I'm a learner too. And I don't really have an excuse because I had to learn the same things. If anything, a learner has to have compassion and can't judge because you've been there too, right? I don't get to judge the guy who takes the class after me because he's learning the same things I learned at a different time. But what's even better is that for those of us who struggle with the fact that for some reason our walk with God hasn't progressed like we hoped it would, or maybe we feel like, man, I haven't really been there with God for a little while, or I've been trying, but I just don't know what to do, and I just feel like I'm failing, or my behaviors are still the same as they were years ago that I hoped would be changed by now. It gives us hope that it's not about the progress. It's about I totally missed that. It's not about the progress, it's about our posture, right? It's not about progress. See, so I think so often we get so focused on the progress we make, especially like, I'm just going to pull the young adult card here real quick. As a young adult, I want progress desperately, right? To like an unhealthy degree. You could read articles online, right? Like 10 steps to being a more effective listener. If I read this and I do it, I'm going to be better. And everything will be solved. Everyone will love me. Everyone will want to listen to me, right? 8 ways to be a better leader. Okay, if I do these 8 steps, right? If I read this article and do these 8 steps, maybe everything will change, right? And none of us really believe it, but deep down we want it, right? You get like these 21 ways to become someone who says no, right? I can't say no if I just do these 21 different things, or even the better ones, it's like 49 ways to have stronger relationships. I didn't get past 3 because I just didn't want to read it, right? But 49 ways to have stronger relationships, and we read these things, and we look at this, and this is the culture, this is the way that I tend to think, is that if I could just do these things, then the progress would be made. I would get from this point to the point I want to be, and then things would be better. And even if I don't really believe that that's how it goes, I still desperately want it to be that way. Because we want progress. We want to get from point A to point B, and we want that to be the end of it. But the problem about being a disciple is that it's not so much about the progress. Jesus absolutely does not want to leave you where you are. So there is a level of progress that he hopes to accomplish in your life, but yet it's not as much about the progress as it is about the posture. The posture that we have to have as people who want to follow Jesus is that of someone who wants to learn, right? And if we are learners, guess what? Then it's not so much about getting from point A to point B. It's about the fact that I am continuously on a journey to becoming more like Jesus. Continuously. And just because I got from here to here doesn't mean the journey is over. It doesn't make me more superior. It doesn't make me, or if I've only gotten from here to here, it doesn't make me less than. It doesn't make me a failure. I'm on a journey with Jesus, and I'm a learner. And that means that I don't have to worry about the progress as much as I do about my posture. I want to be someone, a disciple is someone who learns from a teacher, right? A disciple is someone who wants to become like the teacher. And if that's the case, then it matters about our posture, right? Most of us who went to college and had some teacher who had a PhD, right? Most of us will barely get through our bachelor's degree, right? And that's about it. So it's not so much about becoming exactly who the leader is or the teacher is. It's about the process of learning from them, right? Now with Jesus does claim this. He says, I want you to become like me. Except he says something else, that I will be with you always, not just for 4 years, not just for a couple years. I will be with you always, even until the end of the age. And so what Jesus is asking for us to do is to go on a journey with him, where our posture is that of a learner. And we're not so much worried about the progress as we are about our posture. Does that make sense? And that's exciting to me. But you know what's even better about this? Is that we have a patient teacher. We have a merciful teacher. There's this moment in Matthew chapter 16, if you want to go there. Matthew chapter 16. And it's this really funny moment. Jesus has been talking to some Jewish leaders. And there's these religious guys who were really focused on, if I could just get all of my stuff together, if I could just keep all of these laws and these regulations, then I would be doing the things that would be right in the eyes of God, therefore I would be right in the eyes of God, and therefore I would find salvation. And that's where they were at. And Jesus is talking to them, and they come up to him, and they're like, hey, we want a sign. We want a sign that you, Jesus, are from heaven, that you're this Messiah, this God that you claim to be. We want a sign. Let me just tell you what Jesus had already done up to this point in just this book, okay? Jesus has healed people on multiple occasions, raised people from the dead, he's cast out demons, and then in two separate occasions, two separate times, he fed a combined total of 9,000 people with 12 loaves and a few fish, okay? A loaf of bread will last maybe a week in my home because I like peanut butter and jelly and grilled cheese. I'm a child, okay? I love those things. So a loaf of bread will last me less than half a week, and he fed 9,000 people with 12 loaves of bread and a few fish. Like, what sign are you looking for? Like, what more does this guy have to do to tell you that what are you waiting for? And that's why Jesus, he doesn't react well to it. He's just like, no, I've given you enough. Like, you won't even believe the things I've done. Nothing I could do could get you. So they leave, and him and his disciples go to the other side of this lake. And they get to the other side. Jesus, who I'm sure the whole time has been ignoring whatever conversation the disciples were having, and he's just in his own head thinking about what's happened. And then he says to the disciples, after they get to the other side, he's like, beware of the leaven, the yeast of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, these Jewish leaders. He's like, beware of the yeast, right? Which is a weird term to us. But what his point was just be careful, because these guys, once that message gets into you, that you could do something to earn God's favor, and therefore by whatever circumstances you could be right with God, and then it becomes more about you than it becomes about God, all this stuff. Once that gets into you, it like spreads into the entirety of your life, and you become someone who is not like Jesus. And that's what he's saying to them. Guess what the disciples do? They're like, dude, did you bring bread? No, I didn't bring bread. That's Peter's job. Peter, you bring bread? No, I didn't bring bread, right? Oh, it must be talking about the fact we didn't bring bread. Shoot, who's going to get bread? I don't have any money. It's your turn to buy, right? Like they start arguing about the fact that they don't have bread. And Jesus just like face palms He's like, you got to be kidding me, guys. Like, y'all really this dumb? I think Jesus had a southern accent. Y'all really this dumb? Do you not get this? Like, I literally, like, I'm not kidding. The chapter before, okay, we're in verse 5 when this happens. There's chapter 16, and chapter 15, the end of chapter 15, is the story of him feeding 4,000 people with 7 loaves of bread. He's like, that's not the issue here. Not having bread is not an issue for me. There's something different, and he goes ahead and explains it to them, and then the disciples go, oh, that's what he was saying, right? If I was Jesus, if I was a teacher, I don't know, if you're a teacher in this room, I don't know how the heck you do it. Because that would be, knowing me as a student, I don't know how you did it. Because it's got to be so tough to work with people who can be so dense. But Jesus does it, and he's patient. And then there's the worst moments, because that's annoying, but then there's the worst moments where you got a guy like Peter who's like, I am your number one disciple. I am the one who wants to do everything for you. If everyone leaves you, I won't leave you. I'm the best, okay? And then when Jesus gets arrested and he's taken to be tried, Peter is the one who goes after him, kind of trying to live up to his thing here, but then he gets challenged. Hey, you were with Jesus. No, I wasn't. No, you were with Jesus. And not once, twice, but 3 times he denies it. And so this guy who was like, I'm number one, is now number none. And that's a quote from some, okay. That surprised me. Anyways, he's number one, number none. Now he's failed completely. And guess who the first person that Jesus goes to comfort after he raises from the dead is? Out of his disciples. It's Peter. He goes to Peter. And he's like, hey, dude, do you love me? Yeah, I love you. Okay, feed my sheep. And he gives Peter a calling that no other disciple got, one-on-one. Because I think our God is more merciful, patient, and kind to us than we could ever imagine. See, I think so often our problem is not that we don't want to learn from God, it's that we fear that if we mess up, God is done with us, his patience is up, and he's just going to throw us to the curb. And yet we see this God who is continuously far more merciful and far more patient with us than we could ever imagine. It doesn't matter what we're going through. It doesn't matter if we have doubts. It doesn't matter if we're struggling to have a consistent walk with him. It doesn't matter if we have all of these ideas that are contrary to him. He is patient to deal with you. He's patient to deal with your life. Guess what? Your doubts and your fears and all of these things are not too big for him. And he's not just a God who's like, hey, here's my paper-thin answer. He's a God who will walk with you until you find the answer. Amen. Because he's patient. But me as a disciple, the role that I play is that of a learner. I learn from Jesus. That's my role. I don't have to get to point A to point B. Because it's not so much about the progress as it is about the posture. But then we talk about, if that's a disciple, how do we make disciples as a church? Like if this is our mission, if we want to be a relevant, disciple-making and multiplying church, then how do we make disciples, right? And we read this in Matthew chapter 18 or 28. Let's go back there. Matthew chapter 28. In Matthew chapter 28, it says in verse 19, go therefore and make disciples of all nations. And what we'll often do is we'll split this into 3 things. Make disciples, baptize them, teach them to obey. Those are the 3 things. But what it is, it's a go and make disciples. And then it's saying, here are the 2 things you do to make the disciples. Okay? You baptize them and you teach them to obey all of the words that I've commanded you. Right? Those are the 2 things that we do to make disciples. And so for the next 2 points are just those. We're going to talk about that. Go to Galatians chapter 2. Jesus says the first thing that you do is you baptize them, right? And when I say baptize them, that means us. Like for those of us who have been baptized, it's not a thing that stops. Because here in Galatians chapter 2, verse 20, it says, I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life that I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. And so there's this idea, what baptism is it's this representation of what happens inside of us, that something dies and then something gets raised back into life. The first step to becoming a disciple of Jesus Christ is acknowledging that we're broken, okay? that we're deeply and inherently broken. I have selfishness deep within me, like deep within me, that is, I guess the best word is insidious. It's in there, and I like it. I like it because it gets me what I want, and it fulfills my needs, and I like it. But it always leaves me feeling emptier. It always causes pain to someone else. It always makes me feel like I'm missing something. And it doesn't matter how much I try to be different. It doesn't matter how not racist I am, or how politically correct I am, or how altruistic I am, or whatever you want to say, because still deep down inside me, I have this desire for myself above any single other person. And that's scary, and that causes pain, and it causes the problems we have today. But I have hope in Jesus. And it's not hope that He's just going to magically make my life better, or it's not hope that He's just going to encourage me to try a little bit harder. But you have to go to the book of Romans, and in Romans, there it is, in Romans chapter 6, Romans chapter 6, verses 5 through 8, or 5 through 7, 5 through 8. For if we have been united with Him in a death like His, we shall certainly be united with Him in a resurrection like His. We know that our old self was crucified with Him in order that the body of sin, our old life, would be brought to nothing, so that we would no longer be enslaved to sin. Here we go. For one who has died has been set free from sin. Now if we have died with Christ, we believe that we will also live with Him. That's baptism. That's this idea that this old me has been buried and is now dead, has died with Christ. Like, that's my hope. My hope is not for just some self-help. It's for a new life. Because the gospel is the fact that Jesus took on my brokenness. He took on all of the pain and the suffering that I've caused, all my guilt, my shame, all of this stuff, and He took it. And when He was crucified on that cross, it died with Him. And when He was buried, it was buried with Him. And when He rose into new life, He rose victorious over all of my brokenness and the death that I bring, all of it. He raised victorious over all of it. But now, through faith, I unite with Him in His death. And now, through faith, I rise again with Him into a new, entirely different life. A new heart, a new life within me. And that's the gospel of Jesus Christ. The hope of Jesus Christ is not for self-help. It's for life change. It's for a new life entirely. And the thing is that I hope that you found that. Because what that does for you is it gives you the ability to forgive people because you have been forgiven. Right? It gives you the ability to have hope in the midst of the darkness because there is light in every bit of darkness. And you have the ability to love people that you couldn't have otherwise loved because you have been loved first. And when your heart changes, and when you have this new life inside of you, it changes something about you. I was having a struggle with God this week, and I was just like, man, I'm kind of ticked off and frustrated. I don't even remember why, but it was big. I do remember why now that I'm thinking about it. It's because so often in my life I feel like I'm not doing enough, or I'm failing, or I feel like I'm not living up to what I should. And not just in the realm of God, but in other places in my life, like in my marriage, or in my work, or in my relationships with other people. I just feel like I'm not living up. And then on top of that, you add in this whole like, I like being selfish, and I like what I want, and I would really prefer it if God would just get the heck out of the way so I could do what I like to do. But I'm going to tell you this, guys, that when you experience the gospel, I had to experience the gospel in that moment because I was yelling at God, and I was frustrated, and I was mad, and yet I'm yelling at Him, and I have a patient and a good God who can take it. But then He said to me, hey, listen, you're mad because you want your life to go a certain way, but I don't even want to deal with that life. Because that life, if you just have faith, is dead. It's gone. It's over. And right now, you can have a new one. I'm tired of dealing with my old life because my old man is powerful and he wants stuff and he doesn't want to give up. But I have the faith to know that through Jesus Christ, I have a new life. I am a new man, a new creation. And that's the gospel of Jesus Christ. And if we haven't experienced that, how could we ever learn to obey? Because we're still afraid of this God, and we still got this old guy inside of me trying to do all the stuff that I used to do. That's the first step. And as people who have experienced that, if you have experienced that today, then your job becomes to help other people experience it too. Church, I'm just going to say this real quick for Adventists, because I grew up Adventist and I've grown up in the church my whole life. So many of us have not experienced the gospel. We haven't experienced the fullness and the newness that Jesus wants to bring to your life. It took me so long before I even heard the message of that in church. But today, that's what Jesus wants you to experience. You may have met Jesus a long time ago, but he wants to meet you in a whole new way right now. Right? If you have experienced this, it's our job to help other people find and experience the newness of life that Jesus Christ offers. And if you haven't experienced, I want to ask you, and I want to call you to this idea that you are no longer, you don't have to be bound by your addiction. You don't have to be bound by the brokenness. You don't have to be bound by the pain that you cause or the anger you feel. You don't have to be bound by that, but you can start a journey today with Jesus Christ, and you can have an entirely new life every single day, a second chance. I want to call you to that. But the thing is, that this is just the first part, and it's an incredible message, and it's incredible beauty. But the struggle with that is if we stay there and only there, what we do is we're like, I have a new life. But like this one time where I was so stoked to put together a bed because I just moved into an apartment in college and I had a bed that I was going to put together, and I go to find the Allen wrench to try and put the darn thing together, and guess what? I didn't have an Allen wrench. And there was no Allen wrench near me. I hope you can imagine with me how quickly my excitement died because I'd realized I was going to be sleeping on the floor. The thing is that so often we hope to bring people to this new life in Jesus Christ, but then we don't give them the tools to be able to build a life that lasts. And this is where Jesus gets to the second point. He's like baptizing them because we want to help each and every single person in this church to know that your old man is dead and that you have a new life. But then you get the second part, which is, and then teaching them to obey all that I have commanded you. You know what Jesus says is the great command? This is the way we title it. There's the Great Commission. Go out into all the world and make disciples. There's the Great Commandment. Love God and love others. God calls us to love God and love others. I'm just going to be really transparent with you guys right now. Love is the hardest thing to do because it's anti-me. And I don't like it. I don't want to do it half the time. But let me just tell you this, is that's what Jesus calls us to. And to be someone that loves God and then also loves the people around me, that's tough. And if we don't help people build a life where that can be a reality every single day with accountability, with hope for community, all of this stuff, if we don't help people build that life, and we're just pretty much leaving people without the tools to accomplish what God has called them to. Jesus calls us to that, but then he calls us to all of these other things too, which fall under those two things. I want you to be a light to the world around you. I don't want you to hate anybody, because if you hate somebody, it's like you murdered them. I don't want you to lust after anyone, because if you lust after them, it's like you committed adultery. Don't retaliate, but let people slap you on the cheek. Just endure the wrong because you have been forgiven. You have been saved. You don't have to worry about what they're doing to you. Love your enemy. Pray for those who persecute you. Lay up your treasure not in this world, but in what God gives, because where your treasure is, that's where your heart is. Don't be anxious, for God is going to provide. Don't judge. Treat others as you would have them treat you. Build your house on the rock. Build your house on Jesus. Follow me even at the cost of your family hating you. Come to me and I will give you rest. Forgive over and over and over again. Like, guys, that doesn't come naturally to us, and the only way that we start to build that is within the context of community, where we are going on that journey together. And the specific place where this begins to become a reality in our church at Northville Adventist Fellowship is within the context of small groups. We can try all we want to meet on Saturday morning and try and get it all done in an hour, but I'm just going to tell you that's not the way life works. We could try and just put on events and say, hey, we're going to do this event, we're going to do this event, and we're going to do this, and hopefully you show up, you find a new life, and you just want to live it, and then you have all the tools already. It's not the way it works. I'm on a journey, you're on a journey, we're every single one of us learners, and I'm going to learn from you as much as you learn from me, and that's what I want to see in this church. I want to be part of a community of believers where we have this church where we all gather together on a Saturday morning, and yet church is actually happening in the week in these small groups where we are going on a journey together. We weren't meant to do it alone. Jesus didn't say, go out into all the world, right? Tell people something, and then leave. He said, go out into all the world and make disciples. That sounds like it's intentional. It sounds like I have to be part of that process for a while. We weren't meant to do it alone. We're meant to do it in community with each other. The gospel has to be preached to this world, and then we have to help people live out the gospel. But here's what's so cool about this idea of discipleship and this idea of small groups, of meeting in these communities, of being people who disciple each other. It's this. Jesus was a failure. Fire me. Jesus was a failure. He started out with 12 guys and left with 11. Okay? He had 11 guys left over. He actually lost people on his way. But guess what? He invested in 12 men. Okay? 11 of those guys lasted, added a few more to their number. A bunch of women started following Jesus, and all of a sudden, all of these people started to go out into all the world, and 12 became 2.3 billion today. 2.3 billion today. That's incredible. Like the model, if we go back to Jesus and we measure him by our A to B progress thing here, Jesus went backwards. And yet, we are 2.3 billion today because Jesus did something that blows my mind. He invested in a few. When you invest in a few, you do what Jesus does. You do what Jesus did. And that's what I want to call you today too. That you are called to make disciples. You are not called to sit back. You are not called to just be listeners or consumers. You are called to be people who make disciples. You are called to first be a disciple and then be someone who makes disciples. That's what we're called to as a church. North Hill Adventist Fellowship, that's what we're called to. And so what we're going to do is we're not going to, I would be terrible at this. I would be terrible at being someone who just gets it like, guys, we're going to start next week and let's do it and let's pump ourselves up. I can't do it. That's just not me. I can't do it. What I can tell you is that over the course of the next year, the next 2 years, we're going to go on a slow process of investing in people who want to be part of small groups. And we're going to start investing in leaders. We're going to start investing in people so that we can begin to form communities in our church where we start to know each other better, but most of all, that we help each other on our journey of learning who Jesus is and learning how to be like him. And so what we want to do is we're starting small this first session, but next session, we have 5 small groups ready, okay? We have 5 small groups, and you're going to start getting invited to those things. And I'm not going to set numbers on this. I can't do that. That's up to Jesus. But what I can tell you is that I want to see more and more and more people invested in a small group community so that we can go on the journey together. We're not called to do it alone. We want to see dead lives raised to new life in Jesus Christ. And that's the first call. We want to see people baptized. We want to see people find a new life. But most of all, we want to see that sustained. We want to see people sustained in their relationship with Jesus. We're called to make disciples. And I want to say one more thing before I close. Many of us think like, I can't do that. I'm new at this. I just met Jesus, or I'm like just back into it. I can't do it. How could I ever do it? But let me just tell you this. This was something that spoke to me and has kind of sparked a lot of what we're doing here in these recent months. I was at a conference and I was making excuse after excuse of why things wouldn't work. And the speaker goes, hey, listen, not to me. He didn't say it's directly to me. But he said, God doesn't want to hear your excuses. He wants to see your faith. And for some of you right now, that's the word Jesus is saying to you. I don't want to see your excuses. I know of all of your insecurities. I know them better than you do. I know all of the ways that you just fail at being everything you're supposed to be. But guess what? I'm bigger than all of it. And guess what? You don't learn just by hearing. You learn best when you do. And guess what? We're going to mess up. I mess up all the time at being a leader. I don't know how you guys are still cool with me right now, but I'm bad at this. But I hope that through Jesus, I'm getting better at it. And so we're not going to be disciples who make disciples by waiting until the point where we're, qualified to be disciples who make disciples. You're qualified today. And so I'm calling you to that. Jesus is calling you to that. If you need to go on a journey where you need to find out who Jesus is and you're still unsure about this, then let's talk. Or, even better, let's get you into a place where you could talk with a bunch of other people who've gone through that or are going through it. If you're someone who is pretty sure, you're like, man, my relationship with Jesus right now, thank God, is really good, then I'm calling you right now to come talk to me, to send me an email, to do something, to take the step of being a disciple who makes disciples. I'm going to tell you one more thing about what we're going to do in the future. We're going to have some classes that we do for like 4 weeks at a time. We'll meet on Saturday afternoons that we'll be talking about gospel fluency, which is how do I know the gospel and then be able to express it to other people? Because so many of us, we theoretically know it, but we don't know how to say it. We don't know how to help other people come to that realization themselves. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to do some of those classes, not to just get us to be people who are just like going down the street and like, do you know the gospel? You know God? No. But within the context of relationship, learning how to be people who preach the gospel of Jesus Christ into a world that desperately needs it. So church, I hope I've given you some explicit things of what we hope to do, but I'm just going to be really clear that so much of this is up to God's leading as we move forward as a church. It's going to be a slow process, but it's a process, and I hope that you want to be part of it. Let's pray. Lord, I thank you so much that you are a faithful, merciful, and kind teacher. You don't leave us to our own brokenness, but you seek to bring us out of that. You don't leave us to all of our old ways of thinking. You seek to bring us out of that. But even more so, God, you then call us to be part of bringing other people out of it. And so, God, I don't want my life to be simply a bunch of talking to myself. I don't want our church to be a church that just talks to itself. I want our church, and I want to see this church be what you called it to be, which is people who are disciples who then go out and make more disciples. That's what I want to see in this place. And God, I don't know what you're going to do in North Hill. I can't look into the future and see it. Only you can see that. But I know that through you, incredible things are possible. More amazing things than we've ever seen. And God, I want to be someone who believes in that. Thank you, Lord. Give us strength, give us wisdom to know how to step forward. And we thank you for everything you have done. And we're so excited to see what you're going to do. In your name, amen.
Will you stand with me again?
are so good to us. In this church, we've seen lives healed, we've seen lives changed, we've seen broken pieces put back together. And yet, God, there's still pain and there's still hurt and there's still journeys to be had. And God, we trust in you for the future. We look at you, we look at the past and we say, you have never let us down. Even though sometimes in our hearts it's just like, oh, why haven't you come through? Why haven't you done it? And yet, God, every single time you prove yourself. Whether we see it or not, you are still proven. And so, God, let our view of the past propel us to believe in the present, that you have things to do in this church, that you have places for us to go, that you have lives to be made new. And God, we move forward in uncertain directions. We're going to be stretched and we're going to be pulled in different directions and we're going to be challenged to things that we've never done before. But God, I trust in you that you are strong enough to equip and send us, and that we don't have to fear as long as we have you. So God, as we go out into this place, as we spend the next year, the next 2 years, developing into a church that better serves our community and serves the people in our midst, be with us. Give us wisdom. Show us how good you are all over again. Thank you, Lord, in your name.